The ambient noise in the commercial heavy machinery yard was a constant, deafening roar of idling diesel engines, grinding steel tracks, and the sharp, sudden hiss of hydraulic pressure release valves. It was 1,700 hours on a Tuesday afternoon. The ground beneath my heavy, steel-toed work boots was a treacherous, uneven landscape of crushed gravel, slick, with a thin layer of industrial grease and the freezing, muddy remnants of a morning rainstorm. The air tasted permanently of diesel exhaust, oxidized iron, and damp earth. My name is Messiah Cooper. I am 32 years old. I stand 6 feet and 5 inches tall, and I maintain a baseline weight of 265 pounds of dense, functional muscle. My profession is heavy lift rigging. My operational domain involves calculating the exact center of gravity, the required load distribution, and the specific mechanical shear force necessary to safely suspend objects that weigh upwards of 50 tons. I do not deal in approximations or guesswork. I dictate the mathematics of gravity. I stood next to the massive, bright yellow, mud-caked treads of a Liebherr 200-ton crawler crane, securing a 3-inch braided steel wire rope sling around the circumference of a massive concrete culvert pipe. The rough concrete scraped against my thick leather gloves. I pulled the heavy, forged steel hook taut, seating the thick wire rope cleanly and perfectly into the saddle of the hook, and locked the safety latch with a loud, definitive metallic clack that signaled absolute mechanical security. I stepped back, establishing a safe physical perimeter, and signaled the crane operator enclosed in the glass cab 40 feet above me with a sharp, upward rotation of my index finger. The massive hydraulic winch engaged with a deep, vibrating groan. The steel cable snapped rigid, humming with immense, terrifying tension, and the massive concrete load lifted smoothly and silently from the clinging mud. I wiped my large, calloused hands on a dark, oil-stained shop rag, my shoulder muscles burning with the familiar, dull ache of a 12-hour manual shift. The physical exhaustion was a necessary component of my daily routine. It kept the mind quiet. I turned my head toward the perimeter boundary. The heavy chain-link gate separating our chaotic industrial yard from the adjacent, renovated commercial warehouse slowly rolled open along its rusted metal track, squealing slightly against the rollers. A woman walked into the machinery yard. Her name was Zuri Williams. She was 36 years old. She was the sole proprietor and primary instructor of the Aerial Arts and Pole Fitness Studio located in Unit 4B of the converted brick warehouse next door. I knew her name because she occasionally parked her small, meticulously clean black sedan near my primary rigging truck when the main commercial lot was full. We had spoken exactly twice in the last 6 months, both times consisting of simple, exceedingly brief, utilitarian exchanges regarding parking perimeters and spatial clearances. I am not a man who is good with words. My severe lack of formal higher education often manifests as a heavy, suffocating silence in complex social situations. People look at my physical dimensions and assume a specific, aggressive archetype. They see the sheer mass of the muscle, but they never attempt to engage the mind operating beneath it. Consequently, I keep my interactions brief. I am good with physics, and I am exceptionally good with steel. Zuri was a woman composed entirely of fluid, strictly controlled kinetic energy. Even walking across the hazardous, grease-stained gravel of a heavy machinery yard, her posture was perfectly aligned, her spine incredibly straight, her steps measured and deliberate, bypassing the deep puddles of diesel runoff with absolute, athletic precision. She wore loose, dark gray athletic sweatpants over a black-fitted tank top, her dark hair pulled back tightly into a complex, unmoving protective braid. Her breathing was slightly elevated, not from the minor physical exertion of the walk, but from a visible, rigid state of intense frustration. She stopped exactly 5 feet away from me, establishing a clear, respectful physical boundary. "Messiah," Zuri said, her voice carrying clearly and sharply over the relentless rumble of the idling crane engine. "I need a favor, a professional favor. I will pay your standard hourly rate." I threw the dirty shop rag onto the metal diamond plate deck of the crane's undercarriage. I did not immediately answer her. I looked down at her, slowly analyzing the unexpected variable. People in crisp, clean athletic wear usually only approached my operational zone when something massive was broken, blocking their path, or dangerously unstable. "What is the load?" I asked, my voice a deep, quiet rumble that resonated deep in my chest. I did not need volume to be heard. The physical density of the sound carried the necessary weight. "Me," she said flatly, maintaining absolute, unwavering eye contact. I frowned, a slow, deliberate movement of my heavy brow. I crossed my massive arms over my dark, sweat-stained canvas work jacket, feeling the thick fabric stretch against my biceps. "You," Zuri crossed her own arms, mirroring my posture, her jaw tightening with an evident layer of defensive tension. "I am competing in a highly competitive regional aerial arts and pole fitness showcase next month. It is a critical, high-stakes networking event necessary to secure the venture capital required for my studio's structural expansion. The primary routine requires me to execute a specific, highly complex counterweight lift with a secondary partner. My usual practice partner tore his rotator cuff this morning during a rigorous warm-up session. The showcase requires a raw, unedited video submission of the completed routine by this Friday afternoon to qualify for the final performance roster. If I don't submit the video on time, I automatically lose the slot, and I completely lose the investors." She paused. Taking a slow, controlled breath, she turned her head to look at the massive, grease-stained steel cables hanging from the crane hook, currently suspending 20 tons of concrete effortlessly in the cold air, and then she looked back up to my face. "You move heavy things for a living," she stated, stripping away any polite, unnecessary conversational pretense. "You inherently understand leverage. You understand exactly how to mathematically stabilize a shifting load. I need someone physically strong enough to act as a human base, to completely anchor my center of gravity while I pivot and suspend my body in the air. I need a practice partner to improve my lifts, just for 2 days, to get the specific timing and mechanics right for the camera." I stared at her in the freezing, damp air. "I operate exclusively in a brutal world of industrial steel, heavy hard hats, high visibility vests, and cold mathematical safety calculations." The delicate, highly aesthetic concept of an aerial arts routine was entirely foreign to my rigid operational parameters. I felt the familiar, heavy weight of my own profound social inadequacy settle deep into the bottom of my chest. I felt entirely too large, far too dirty, and entirely too rough for whatever delicate maneuver she was asking me to participate in. "I am a rigger," I said slowly, choosing my few words carefully to convey the exact boundaries of my competence. "I am not a dancer. I entirely lack the physical coordination for performance art. I do not need you to dance," Zuri countered immediately, stepping a fraction of an inch closer, her dark eyes fiercely determined, refusing to accept a refusal based on my internal insecurity. "I need you to stand perfectly still and bear weight. I need a structural anchor. Are you strong enough to hold 130 pounds at a 45-degree lateral angle without shifting your physical base?" The question wasn't a social challenge or a playful joke. It was a pure, unadulterated technical requirement. "Yes," I answered simply. It was a factual, undeniable truth. I routinely positioned manual counterweights exceeding 300 pounds using sheer physical force. "Then be at my studio at 1900 hours, she instructed, her tense shoulders dropping slightly, a microscopic fraction of her intense stress bleeding away into the cold air as the immediate crisis was mitigated. "Wear clothes you can move in without restricting your joints. Absolutely no steel-toed boots on the hardwood floor." She turned on her heel and walked back through the chain-link gate, her silhouette disappearing into the gathering twilight, leaving me standing next to the 200-ton crane, entirely uncertain of what kind of complex operational hazard I had just agreed to mitigate. At 1,855 hours, I walked through the heavy glass double doors of Zuri's studio. The interior environment was a stark, jarring contrast to my brutal machinery yard. The air smelled faintly of dry chalk dust, athletic rosin, and a sharp, clean citrus solvent. The lighting was incredibly warm and ambient, reflecting brightly off the pristine, polished hardwood floor. 6 tall, gleaming brass poles extended vertically from the floor to the high, exposed beam industrial ceiling. Zuri was standing near the center of the room, talking in low, rapid, serious tones to Clara, her studio manager and primary safety spotter. Clara looked up, her eyes widening slightly as my massive frame filled the doorway, temporarily blocking the ambient light from the corridor. "You actually got him to come," Clara murmured, zipping up a heavy canvas gym bag behind the small, minimalist reception desk. "He understands the fundamental laws of physics," Zuri replied practically, turning and walking directly over to me. She looked critically at my attire, I wore a plain, dark gray fitted t-shirt that stretched tightly across my chest and heavy-duty, flexible canvas work pants. I had intentionally left my heavy, grease-stained, steel-toed boots locked securely in the cab of my truck, wearing thick, clean gray athletic socks instead. "Take off your socks," Zuri instructed, gesturing to a small wooden cubby near the entrance door. "The floor needs to remain entirely free of lint to prevent slippage, and you need the direct skin contact for maximum traction." I complied silently, pulling the socks off and placing them neatly into the cubby. I walked barefoot onto the cold, polished hardwood. I felt entirely, profoundly out of place, like an industrial bulldozer parked inside a fragile, mirrored ballet studio. I kept my large hands resting heavily at my sides, consciously attempting to minimize my massive physical footprint in her pristine space. "The primary maneuver is a complex variation of a suspended human flag," Zuri explained, stepping up to the center brass pole. She did not waste precious time with awkward small talk or pleasantries. She treated the session exactly like a tactical safety briefing before a critical, high-risk lift. I respected the sheer efficiency of her communication. "I will grip the pole firmly with my primary right hand. You will stand directly behind me, facing my back. I will explosively invert my body and hook my right knee securely over your left shoulder. You must grip my waist with both hands and provide a solid, completely unmoving counterweight as I extend my entire body laterally away from the pole." I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, analyzing the mechanical requirements in my head. It was a simple fulcrum and lever physics problem. The rigid brass pole was the primary vertical anchor. I was the secondary, dynamic support structure. If my base shifted even a fraction of an inch during the violent weight transfer, the sudden torque would snap her grip, causing a severe, uncontrolled fall to the hardwood floor. "Show me the exact grip point," I requested, my voice a low, steady baseline, demanding precise structural coordinates. Zuri stepped close to me, entirely invading my personal space without a second of hesitation. She reached out, grasped my large, heavily calloused wrists with her strong hands, and pulled my arms forward, placing my palms firmly against the sides of her waist, just above her hips. The physical contact was sudden, jarring, and purely utilitarian. I am not accustomed to handling soft, living things. I held my breath, terrified of applying too much localized pressure and bruising her delicate ribs. My thick fingers remained stiff, hovering rigidly against the fabric of her athletic apparel. "You aren't holding a fragile pane of glass, Messiah," she corrected sharply, her voice direct, demanding absolute physical competence. "I am a trained athlete. If you don't secure the load with absolute, uncompromising certainty, I will fall and break my neck. Grip me. Be an anchor." I exhaled slowly, releasing the built-up tension in my lungs. I recalibrated my physical output. I tightened my large hands, applying a firm, calculated, perfectly even pressure around her narrow waist, physically locking her precise center of gravity securely against my own massive, dense frame. "Better," she nodded, her tone reflecting professional approval. "Now, widen your stance. Lower your center of mass. Do not rely on the muscles in your lower back to hold the weight. Use your quadriceps." I bent my knees, dropping my hips into a wide, heavily rooted, perfectly balanced stance. I locked my core muscles tight. I became an immovable, localized object of pure structural support. "Ready?" she asked, looking back over her shoulder, her eyes entirely focused. "The base is secure," I confirmed quietly. Zuri reached up, gripping the brass pole high above her head. With a sudden, explosive, breathtaking burst of controlled kinetic energy, she vaulted her entire body upward. She inverted in a fraction of a second, hooking her right knee securely over the thick muscle of my left shoulder, trusting my stable base completely. Without the slightest hesitation, she released her secondary grip on the brass pole, extending her entire body out horizontally, parallel to the hardwood floor, suspended entirely by the friction of her single hand on the pole and the unyielding, iron anchor of my grip on her waist. The sudden, violent, lateral shift in weight was significant, pulling incredibly hard against my shoulder and hands, but the mathematics of the maneuver were entirely predictable. I did not move a single millimeter. I absorbed the heavy kinetic force, transferring it efficiently down through my locked spine, through the thick columns of my legs, and deep into the solid hardwood floor. "Hold!" she commanded, the core muscles in her abdomen visibly trembling under the extreme physical exertion of fighting gravity. We held the suspended, horizontal posture for exactly 12 agonizingly slow seconds. The silence in the studio was absolute and profound, broken only by the sound of our synchronized, heavy breathing and the faint, high-pitched squeak of her skin gripping the brass. It was an intensely focused, beautifully pure form of physical communication. I was not a passive spectator watching a performance. I was a vital, load-bearing, indispensable component of her art. "Down!" she gasped, her strength waning. I absorbed her descending weight perfectly, guiding her hips safely and smoothly back to a vertical position until her bare feet touched the wood. I immediately released my tight grip on her waist, stepping a full foot backward to quickly re-establish a highly respectful physical boundary. Zuri turned around, panting slightly, a brilliant, genuinely thrilled smile breaking across her flushed, beautiful face. It completely transformed her severe, focused demeanor into something incandescent. "That was perfect," she breathed, looking up at me, her dark eyes shining with residual adrenaline. My last partner always subconsciously shifted his right foot to compensate for the sudden, violent torque. He didn't trust his own balance. "You didn't even flinch." It was exactly like resting my leg on a concrete pillar. "My base is secure," I replied quietly, looking down at my massive hands, feeling a strange, unfamiliar, and entirely unregulated warmth expanding deeply in my chest. The physics were structurally sound. We practiced the complex lift sequence and various acrobatic transitions for 2 solid hours. We did not discuss our messy personal lives. We did not engage in awkward, forced pleasantries about the weather or the city. We discussed precise angles of approach, momentum control, and specific friction coefficients. The heavy, suffocating isolation I usually felt in civilian social situations evaporated entirely when the communication was reduced to pure, actionable, physical reality. I was useful. I thoroughly understood the specific parameters of the assignment. The next evening, Wednesday, at 1900 hours, I returned to the studio for our second and final practice session. I did not arrive empty-handed. When I walked through the double glass doors, I carried a small, tightly sealed plastic container. Zuri was on the floor near the mirrors, stretching her hamstrings. I walked over and set the container down gently beside her insulated water bottle. She looked up, pausing her stretch, a curious expression on her face. "What is that?" "High-grade magnesium carbonate," I explained, my voice a quiet, informative rumble. "We utilize it daily in the rigging yard to maintain absolute, unyielding friction on heavy steel cables in high-humidity environments. During our final 3 lift rotations yesterday evening, I visually observed your primary hand slipping downward on the brass pole by approximately 1/8 of an inch due to localized perspiration. It severely compromises your structural stability. This compound will eliminate the moisture entirely and maximize your grip." Zuri stared at the small plastic container, then slowly looked up at my face. She sat up straight. The intensely focused, severe athletic mask she wore softened dramatically, revealing a flash of deep, profound, unfiltered appreciation. I had not simply performed a manual task. I had actively, carefully observed her struggle and provided a concrete, actionable solution to ensure her safety. "You noticed my grip slipping?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I monitor the entire load path," I replied, feeling a faint, uncomfortable heat rise in my thick neck, entirely unused to being the subject of intense, positive scrutiny. "Any failure in friction is a catastrophic hazard. I brought the proper tool to fix it." "Thank you, Messiah," she said, her voice carrying a heavy emotional weight that extended far beyond the simple container of liquid chalk. She unscrewed the lid, applied a small amount of the white compound to her palms, and rubbed them vigorously together. The liquid dried instantly, leaving a stark, white, high-friction coating on her skin. She reached up and gripped the brass pole. Her hands locked onto the metal with absolutely zero slide. "It's perfect." We ran the routine flawlessly. The mechanics were completely dialed in, our movements perfectly synchronized. By 2100 hours, we were sitting on the hardwood floor near the mirrors, slowly cooling down. She drank deeply from her water bottle. I sat cross-legged, my massive frame taking up significant space on the floor, drinking black, bitter coffee from my dented thermos. The silence between us was no longer heavy or awkward. It was the comfortable, deeply settled quiet of 2 highly competent people who had successfully executed a complex job together. Then, on Thursday afternoon, a hostile, highly destructive variable violently invaded the sanctuary. I was in the yard, securing a massive, 6-ton steel I-beam to a flatbed transport trailer with heavy, grade 70 binding chains. When I heard the sharp, aggressively bureaucratic tone of an unfamiliar, loud voice echoing from the open double doors of Zuri's studio, I immediately dropped the heavy steel binding lever onto the deck of the trailer. I wiped the dark grease from my hands onto my heavy pants. I walked quickly toward the building, my instincts flaring. I stepped into the doorway of the studio. The atmosphere was immediately, tangibly toxic. Zuri was standing near the reception desk, her posture rigidly defensive, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Standing opposite her was a man wearing a cheap, ill-fitting gray suit and a municipal commercial safety inspector's badge clipped prominently to his leather belt. Vance. I recognized the archetype instantly. He was a commercial building inspector notoriously known throughout the entire industrial district for utilizing obscure, highly technical code violations to mercilessly extort cash bribes from independent small business owners. You are currently operating a commercial athletic facility with entirely unverified structural mounting points, Vance stated loudly, pointing his expensive pen aggressively at the ceiling where the 6 brass poles were anchored. Those overhead industrial beams are rated exclusively for static industrial storage, not dynamic, kinetic human weight. The massive shear force generated by your acrobatics is a critical structural liability. I am officially issuing a red tag citation. The studio is shut down immediately, effective right now, until you can provide a certified structural engineering report verifying the dynamic load capacity. Or, Vance smiled, a slick, deeply predatory expression that made my massive jaw lock tight. Or, we can creatively expedite the municipal approval process, Vance continued, his voice dropping to a sleazy, conspiratorial murmur. For a minor administrative processing fee of $2,000, paid in cash today, I can officially sign off on the visual inspection myself and keep your doors open for the showcase. I don't have $2,000 in cash, Mr. Vance, Zuri said, her voice tight, vibrating with a volatile mixture of raw, helpless anger and rapidly rising panic. And I have an investor showcase video submission due tomorrow afternoon. If you lock my doors today, I can't record the routine. I lose the showcase slot. I lose the entire studio. Then I strongly suggest you call a wealthy friend to quickly find the money, Vance sneered, entirely lacking human empathy, heavily leveraging the undisputed authority of his municipal badge. Because right now, this building is a catastrophic safety hazard, and I am officially shutting it down. I did not shout. I did not engage in a rapid, highly articulate legal debate regarding municipal zoning laws and safety ordinances. I lack the extensive vocabulary for complex verbal sparring, and emotional anger is a highly inefficient mechanism for solving problems. I utilize concrete, undeniable physical reality. I stepped fully into the studio. My heavy work boots thudded definitively against the polished hardwood. I walked directly across the room toward Vance. I did not stop until I was exactly 18 inches away from his chest, aggressively invading his personal space, forcing him to physically crane his neck steeply upward to look at my face. I am a wall of dense, unyielding muscle built by a decade of moving cold iron. I let him feel the absolute, terrifying weight of that physical reality. The structural mounting points are fully verified and mathematically secure, I stated. My voice a deep, flat rumble that literally vibrated the hardwood floorboards beneath our feet. Vance stepped back instinctively, stumbling slightly, his arrogant sneer faltering rapidly as his primitive survival instincts successfully registered the massive physical disparity between us. Who the hell are you? This is an official municipal safety inspection. Back off. I am the rigger, I replied simply, maintaining my cold, unblinking stare. I raised my large hand and pointed a thick, calloused finger directly at the heavy steel brackets securing the brass poles to the massive wooden ceiling beams. I surgically stripped away his bureaucratic jargon with raw, undeniable, empirical data. Those are half-inch, forged carbon steel collar ties. They are anchored directly into the primary load-bearing joists with 5/8 grade 8 hex bolts. The mechanical shear strength is north of 20,000 pounds in single shear per bolt. The maximum dynamic load of a human body executing a kinetic spin generates less than 400 pounds of force. The entire roof of this warehouse will collapse into rubble before those brackets even begin to experience metallurgical fatigue. Vance swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously to my massive, grease-stained hands, then back up to the ceiling mounts. You. You aren't an engineer. You don't possess a municipal stamp. You can't legally certify the load for the city based on an opinion? I safely move 200-ton cranes for a living, I said quietly, leaning a microscopic fraction of an inch forward, compressing the air between us. I did not threaten him with physical violence. My sheer physical presence was the absolute threat. If you attempt to lock these doors based on a mathematically impossible safety hazard, I will personally request a federal OSHA inspector and the district attorney's office to formally, thoroughly audit every single commercial citation you have issued in this district for the last 5 years. I will completely dismantle your administrative fee structure. Vance stared at the solid, immovable wall of my chest. He looked past my shoulder at Zuri, who was watching the intense exchange with wide, entirely shocked eyes. He realized the extortion attempt had failed catastrophically. He had cornered his prey, only to quickly discover the perimeter was guarded by a monster. Fine, Vance spat, his voice cracking slightly, the false authority entirely crumbling. He backed away rapidly toward the double glass doors. But I'll be back next month for the standard operational review. Have your formal engineering paperwork ready, or the doors get locked permanently. He pushed violently through the glass doors and practically ran out of the building. The heavy, ringing silence of the studio returned. I stood perfectly still in the center of the room, my hands resting awkwardly at my sides. I was suddenly, acutely aware of my own massive size, the dark dirt on my clothes, and the harsh scent of diesel fuel I had brought into her clean, perfect space. I had aggressively stepped out of my protective shadows. I felt entirely exposed and overwhelmingly vulnerable. Zuri walked slowly toward me across the hardwood. The defensive, terrified armor she had been forced to wear around Vance was completely gone. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered, her voice incredibly soft, stopping just out of arm's reach. "He could have called the police on you. He could have caused massive trouble for your boss in the yard. You risked your job." "He was operating on a fraudulent premise," I replied, looking down at my heavy boots, struggling to find the right words to articulate the massive protective surge in my chest. "He assumed you were a soft target because you were alone in the room. I do not tolerate bullies. I secured the perimeter. You are safe to work." Zuri stopped exactly 1 foot in front of me. She didn't say anything for a long, agonizing moment. She reached out. She didn't hesitate or ask permission. She placed her soft palm flat against the center of my chest, right over my sternum, directly over the heavy, rapid, entirely unregulated thudding of my heart. "Your heart is racing, Messiah," she murmured, her thumb lightly tracing the rough, sweat-stained cotton of my dark t-shirt. "It is a biological response to an uncalculated variable," I admitted, my voice dropping to a rough, ragged whisper. The deep, heavy isolation I had carried for years was entirely, irrevocably fractured by her simple touch. "Are you afraid?" she asked, looking up into my eyes, seeing right through the thick muscle to the man underneath. "I am unaccustomed to soft things," I answered honestly, terrified of breaking the fragile, beautiful moment with my clumsiness. "I am unaccustomed to people wanting me in their space when nothing is physically broken." "I am not a soft thing," Zuri corrected gently, her dark eyes fierce and absolutely certain. "I am an athlete. I hold my own weight in this world, but I am very, very glad you are here to anchor the base when I am tired." I lifted my large, heavy hand. I moved slowly, deliberately, giving her ample time to pull away if she chose. I wrapped my calloused fingers gently over hers where it rested against my chest, covering her hand completely. I held her hand firmly, entirely abandoning the safety of my isolation. "The base is secure," I promised, the words feeling heavy, true, and permanent. But the mechanical reality of Vance's bureaucratic threat remained. That night, Zuri sat heavily on the studio floor, entirely defeated. "He's right, Messiah. His extortion failed today. But the law is the law. To legally operate a commercial aerial studio, the municipal code requires a formal, certified load test certification for the ceiling mounts. A visual inspection isn't enough. It takes 3 weeks and $5,000 to get a certified structural engineer out here to physically sign the paperwork. I don't have the money, and the final safety deadline is tomorrow at noon before I can legally film the showcase video." She buried her face in her hands, her resilience finally breaking under the administrative weight. I looked at the brass poles. I looked at the ceiling mounts. I am not an engineer with a municipal stamp. I am a rigger, But in the harsh industrial world, there is a specific mechanism to override bureaucratic paperwork with absolute, empirical physical reality. Do not pack your equipment, I stated, my voice a low, commanding rumble. I turned and walked out of the studio without further explanation. I left her confused, but I did not have time for words. I had a technical objective to execute. I walked back into the dark, heavy machinery yard. I utilized my master keys to access the primary tool lockup container. I retrieved a heavy, highly specialized piece of equipment, a Dillon ED Extreme digital dynamometer, a highly calibrated industrial load cell utilized to certify the lifting capacity of heavy construction cranes. I grabbed 2 high-tensile steel rigging slings and a massive 3-ton manual chain hoist. I returned to the studio at 0200 hours. Zuri was gone, having locked up the facility for the night. I used the spare emergency key Clara kept securely hidden under a loose brick in the back alley. I worked through the night in absolute, focused silence. I climbed a heavy A-frame ladder. I attached the steel rigging slings directly to the primary ceiling mounts that held the brass poles. I hung the digital dynamometer from the slings and attached the manual chain hoist to the bottom of the load cell, anchoring the other end securely to the solid concrete foundation located beneath the hardwood floor. I engaged the hoist, pulling the heavy steel chain, manually cranking massive, downward mechanical force directly onto the ceiling mounts. The bright digital readout on the dynamometer climbed steadily. 500 pounds. 1,000 pounds. 1,000. 500 pounds. The strict municipal safety code required the mounts to hold a minimum safety factor of 4 times the weight of a 200-pound human. 800 pounds. I cranked the heavy hoist until the digital load cell registered exactly 2,500 pounds of sustained, static downward force. The massive wooden ceiling joist groaned slightly under the extreme pressure, but the forged carbon steel brackets did not deflect a single millimeter. The structure was an absolute, unyielding fortress. I locked the hoist mechanism. I pulled my encrypted digital tablet from my pocket. I downloaded the log telemetry data directly from the dynamometer, the manufacturer's official calibration certificates, the specific load cell serial numbers, and took time-stamped photos of the continuous test to establish a perfect chain of custody. I printed the empirical data logs using the small wireless printer located behind the reception desk. Friday morning, 1,100 hours. Zuri arrived at the studio, her eyes red from a lack of sleep, carrying empty cardboard boxes. Clara walked in directly behind her, looking grim. They stopped dead in the doorway, staring in absolute shock. I was standing in the center of the room. The massive chain hoist and the glowing digital load cell were still suspended from the ceiling, pulling the building's infrastructure into a state of absolute, undeniable tension. Clara stared at the heavy chains, her eyes wide. "This is the safest thing I've ever seen in this studio," Clara muttered, shaking her head in disbelief. "Messiah," Zuri gasped, dropping the cardboard boxes onto the floor. "What did you do?" "I executed a localized proof of concept," I stated calmly, gathering the printed paperwork. Before I could fully explain the data, the studio doors opened violently again. Vance marched in, accompanied by a senior municipal safety director holding a formal cease and desist and immediate closure notice pending structural documentation. Vance looked incredibly smug, expecting to find the studio empty. "Time's up, Miss Williams," Vance announced loudly. "Unless you miraculously produced a structural engineering certificate overnight, this facility is officially and permanently closed." He stopped abruptly, his eyes landing on the massive steel chains and the digital dynamometer currently humming in the center of the room. I did not wait for his inadequate brain to process the heavy machinery. I picked up the thick stack of printed telemetry logs and walked directly toward the senior safety director. I bypassed Vance entirely, rendering him irrelevant. "I'm the senior rigging master for Apex Heavy Logistics," I stated, presenting my formal credentials to the safety director. "This is a comprehensive, empirical log generated by a calibrated Dillon ED Extreme digital load cell. At 0300 hours this morning, I applied 2,500 pounds of static downward force to the primary ceiling mounts of this facility for a duration of 60 continuous minutes. The structure experienced 0 measurable deflection." The safety director took the paperwork, his eyes scanning the digital logs, the calibration certificates, and the time-stamped photos. Municipal Code 4A requires a safety factor of 800 pounds for dynamic human loads. I continued, my voice echoing with absolute, empirical authority. This structure has been empirically proven to successfully hold 3 times the legal requirement. The safety director looked at the massive chains pulling aggressively against the ceiling, then looked back at the flawless, verified data. He nodded approvingly. I am not stamping this as a permanent engineering certificate, Mr. Cooper, the safety director said, turning his attention to Zuri. But I will accept this highly rigorous empirical calibration as an emergency temporary occupancy hold removal. You are officially cleared for filming today, pending a formal engineer's stamped letter within 14 days. The facility is empirically safe for immediate use. He turned to Vance, his expression darkening with severe professional irritation. Why did you request an immediate lockout and cease and desist order for a facility that aggressively exceeds safety compliance by a factor of 3, Vance? This is an atrocious abuse of municipal resources. Vance's face drained of all color. He looked at the machine, he looked at me, and he realized his extortion tactic had been utterly annihilated by superior mathematics and strict industrial protocol. I must have miscalculated the visual stress on the brackets, Vance stammered, backing quickly toward the door, his career suddenly in severe, undeniable jeopardy. Consider your visual assessments officially under review, the director snapped, following him out of the building. Let's go. The doors closed heavily. The bureaucratic threat was entirely neutralized. Zuri stared at the empty doorway, then looked down at the stack of certified paperwork currently resting on her desk. She slowly walked over to me. She didn't say a word. She reached up, wrapped her arms tightly around my thick neck, and buried her face deeply against my chest, holding me with a fierce, desperate strength. I wrapped my massive arms around her, burying my face in her hair, breathing in the scent of citrus and athletic chalk. I closed my eyes, holding the entire world in my hands. You didn't need an engineer today, I murmured softly against her hair, holding her securely. You just needed the load verified. You don't have to carry it alone again. At 1,500 hours, the video recording equipment was properly set up. The studio was completely quiet. Zuri stood by the brass pole. I stood behind her. We didn't need to speak. We intimately knew the physics. We perfectly knew the timing. She vaulted upward, hooking her knee smoothly over my shoulder. I gripped her waist, locking her center of gravity securely to my own. She extended horizontally. A beautiful, flawless execution of the suspended flag maneuver. I stood exactly like a pillar of concrete, absorbing the kinetic energy, entirely immovable. We held the perfect lift for the camera, permanently securing her showcase submission. When she dropped gracefully back to the floor, she didn't step away. She stayed close, leaning heavily against my chest, her breathing heavy. I reached into the deep pocket of my canvas jacket. I pulled out a heavy, dull gray metal object and placed it securely into her hands. She looked down. It was a solid, custom-forged carbon steel mounting bracket. I fabricated this in the yard forge this morning, I explained quietly, my voice rumbling in the quiet room. The commercial brackets currently holding your poles are sufficient, but they are generic. This bracket is designed specifically for your physical dimensions. It is indestructible. It will never fail under pressure. Zuri traced the heavy, cold steel with her fingertips, her dark eyes shining with unshed tears. She understood exactly what I was handing her. It wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a physical promise of permanence. You are going to help me install it, she stated, looking up at me, a brilliant, breathtaking smile breaking across her face. I will secure the load, I promised, taking her hand gently in mine, feeling the absolute, unbreakable strength of the connection. The end.